Let's get started. I'm François Gay, founder of the Canadian Cybersecurity Network, and on behalf of CCN, Canadian Cybersecurity Network, I'm happy to welcome Christopher Hills, the Chief Security Strategist for Beyond Trust, to this panel. The panel is entitled, Does Your Organization Suffer from an Identity and Access Crisis? And Chris, welcome. I'll let you continue on if you want to continue introducing yourself, and over to you, and I'll join you later.
Awesome. Thank you, Francois, and thank you to the CCN, folks for allowing me. My name's Chris Hills. I'll be your host today. I am the Chief Security Strategist here at Beyond Trust. I actually have the coolest email at the company. It's chills@beyondtrust.com. You can also find me LinkedIn/chills. Today, we're actually going to be discussing, does your organization suffer from an identity crisis? That is really the big thing here. And so as part of today's session, we basically want to define the play on words for identity crisis. I'll walk you through a quick introduction of myself, my background, why me of all people to be speaking to you today. And we're also going to have a formal definition of identity crisis. You may not be out there, I should say, you may be out there looking at maybe some resources like dark reading, bleeping computer, or even hacking news as to why so many organizations are suffering from an identity attack chain type of an attack. Then we're going to go over the top 5 identity risks, the 5 primary flaws with misconfigurations, misuse, or abuse of identities within organizations that can lead to an identity crisis. Finally, we'll wrap up at the end with the Beyond Trust solution and give you a nice understanding of what is privileged access management. So as for myself, I've been in the IT industry for 20 plus years. I've been working with PAM directly hands-on since 2012. I've been with Beyond Trust for a little over 5 years, and I've held several titles. So people had asked me, hey, Chris, do you have a card? No, I stopped after my second title change, but I've been a senior solutions architect. I've held the deputy CTO role and the deputy CISO role. Since being here at Beyond Trust, I am a book author of the Cloud Attack Vectors book. I am a contributor in the most recent book that Maury Haber, our chief security advisor, just released. And I was also an editor in his former book, Privilege Attack Vectors. I've written several articles, including Dark Reading, CSO, CXO, along with other articles published in UAE, APJ, and I've also written a ton of our PAM compliance matrix documents here at Beyond Trust, to include the older CIS 20, and then the 18 MITRE attack, ISO, PCI, NIST, and even GDPR. I am a former practitioner from a large financial institution where not only I was a product owner, but I was also the service owner for PAM, along with being responsible for its security posture and its maturity. Prior to that, in my former life, I'm a veteran of the U.S. Navy working in aviation, and I currently spend a great deal of my time speaking at events and webinars, doing things like this, and talking with customers, potential customers around the current identity landscape, market trends, while providing executive sponsorship to our partners, prospects, and regions. So we all know there is an identity crisis out there, but what you may not appreciate for the pun or play on words for what it is, really, if you're looking at the periodicals or searching the web for modern attacks, you've probably seen what's happened to Microsoft or HP, what's happened to a wide variety of organizations over the last few months, and that is credential theft is on the rise. Even so, Microsoft reported the spray attack against a legacy system that had admin credentials externally facing, got as deep as their source code before they were able to potentially remediate the issues entirely. When you think about these types of attacks that are out there, from vulnerabilities and exploits to misconfigurations, we've come to a modern conclusion that it's easier for threat actors to log in rather than hack in. The cost, it's just too deep to develop a vulnerability and exploit by a nation state or even organized crime certificates. And the cost is just through the roof to create that. So why not go an easier route, a more cost-effective route for them? And that is social engineering, using phishing, emails, phone, or whatever technique may be, including now deepfake technology to compromise an environment. And that's why we're seeing the statistics we see on the screen. It's so much easier to use social engineering to attack an organization and steal or get malware planted or conduct a ransomware attack rather than find that vulnerability and exploit it. And that is a modern identity crisis. In fact, if you follow the news, you notice in Hong Kong earlier this year, $25 million was stolen from an organization because of deepfake AI technology impersonating various executives. They basically used a unified communication system to contact an employee that could conduct the transaction without any additional security controls and compromise the environment. Basically, their CEO and CFO were all completely impersonated with deepfakes, video, audio, and that person got to conduct the person they got to conduct the actual transfer because there was no other controls in place. They could do it without any other verification. This type of modern identity crisis is what we all have to worry about today. So, because at the end of the day, the threat actors are targeting broader swaths of passwords, credentials, sessions, accounts, and so on. Basically, everything we operate today from a business perspective needs these in order to function, whether they're humans, whether they're machines, or machine to human, or human to machine, or machine to machine, or any combination. And that it interconnects all of our workflows. If you think about all the applications that you manage or maybe even helped implement, maybe there's secrets, there's credentials, there's APIs, there's certificates, there's usernames, passwords, there's MFA. There's all of it out there interconnecting every type of business workflow amongst a wide variety of operating systems, identity providers, cloud providers, and systems of that sort. Any one of those points, if the secrets are stolen based on the privileges that are granted, can be a penetration point, can lead to an identity attack vector, which is why we honor things like least privilege and why we try to put as many of the most sensitive ones in a privileged access management solution. It's why we use identity governance for joiner, mover, leaver processes when humans are involved or even machines to make sure those workflows do not become a liability to the business. But that in itself is the problem. No one knows where all of those are. We have a problem with people having their names associated with service accounts. We bring things up dynamically, then tear them down, and we don't always verify when things are in that state, and we have high risk. Now, with all those interconnected identities and workflows, we have to think about the threat actors abusing the modern attack chain. Now, many of you might be familiar with the right-hand side of this. This is a modernized version of the Lockheed Martin attack chain, but we want to focus on that is on the left-hand side for starters, basically left of the attack vectors. Back in the days, many years ago, when it came to vulnerabilities and such things like Blaster or Code Red, Sasser, and all sorts of other cool worms back in the day that were done for fun. Today, if any of those things were basically in the wild, we would see a massive malware implications and ransomware at scales we've never seen before. And the latest version really of that was the Miram botnet several years ago, but we've gotten pretty mature. We know how to scan a network for vulnerabilities. We know how to patch. And hopefully organizations, have gotten mature enough to keep patch schedules with an SLA. Now, a few years ago, there was a major shift to the cloud, blame it on COVID or any other, modernization. We realized that credential scans really don't work anymore. We ended up getting CMAP technologies, basically tools that run in the cloud using APIs and side scanning technology to do vulnerability assessment. And ultimately, underneath the hood, we didn't really have to log in with credentials to perform the assessments. Now, we still do that on-prem, but in the cloud, you really don't want SSH or things like NTLM enabled. So someone could come in and authenticate and then do a scan. We've gotten better. We do the top level pretty well, but it's the bottom level where we have the identity crisis. And that really is new. That is the latest and hottest risk surface, compromising the organizations I've mentioned before. And they are the highest risk to us. They are the identity attack vectors. Many organizations do not have that mature identity and access strategy. They don't know what identity security is. They don't understand the concept of identity fabric. And we're going to go through that in the presentation so that you can understand how to shore up your identity and access management infrastructure, provide identity security so that the simplest credentials out there are not overprivileged, left over from shadow IT, or in place because of maybe bring your own cloud or some other fault within the organization. Now let's consider the typical identity lifecycle: reconnaissance, infiltration, exploitation, and then exfiltration. Reconnaissance really happens on a targeted attack. This is where the threat actor, nation state, or organized cyber criminal is trying to learn as much about the organization, or for that matter, a single person, as possible. And as much as we love it, LinkedIn, as great as it is a great place for threat actors to find out who they are targeting. When you change jobs, when you make connections, when you post things, when your skills get endorsed, threat actors are scraping things like this, like LinkedIn, to learn more about you and then ask you questions. For commercial use, look, we see it all the time. Something public on social media, and that a threat actor has, and you might get a fake kidnapping email, as obscure as that may be. Your daughter's been kidnapped, send $5,000 in gift cards, or send Bitcoin to have her released. Now, this may sound extreme, but this type of threat, it really is out there. These types of attacks occur due to the reconnaissance piece. But honestly, at the end of the day, most are opportunistic. They are phishing attacks. They are SMS attacks. They are drive-bys. They are something to get you to engage with the threat actor so they can begin the infiltration part. Oh, your Netflix account, your bank account. Oh, I posted a note for you in the partner portal, for that matter. Whatever it may be to get you to enter, to click on, to type in your password on a watering hole or something through a supply chain, or here's a security patch you're missing, please run it. This gets them in that front door. Good social engineering, especially with deep fake and AI technology, makes infiltration very easy. Then we end up with exploitation. What are they going to do? How far are they going to go? How much lateral movement can they get? What privileges were assigned to that account when they broke in? Think about the exploitation of a spray attack on a public-facing website where a global admin was forward-facing without MFA and no monitoring. If you've been watching the news, that is literally against every security best practice. The exploitation got really deep, and the exfiltration, which we know now, did involve emails and some source code. Now, I'm going to cover in a few moments another real-world scenario of this as it pertains to the Okta support breach. But I think you get the gist of every attack from an identity lifecycle. It can be mapped into these 4 steps, and hopefully the dwell time is not long for a company to block it. Maybe step 1 or maybe even step 2. But unfortunately, we see a large scale of breaches across the globe. Healthcare organizations, government, where it has gone through step 4 and it has been persistent for a long period of time. Now, we can easily conclude humans are the weakest link. We are. At the end of the day, we're gullible. We can even be arrogant or ignorant for that matter, thinking something bad won't happen to us. We think our companies have put the best security tools on our devices, and clicking on a bad link won't do anything because they've implemented the best security controls. My home computer or even my phone is perfect. I'll hit update every time, or I'm running antivirus on that computer. The fact is, there are tons of 0 days out there. There are tons of ways to socially engineer a person to get into their system. And it may not be through an exploit. It can be for something as simple as credential thefts that we've been highlighting here. And the most common vehicles are phishing. It is the #1 attack vector. Voice phishing, SMS phishing, deepfakes, and even some of the newer ones that have some of the craziest names like pig butchery, which is human trafficking using people to try and solicit a contact with you. I get it all the time. You get that text message that says, hey, I finally found you, or I really like what you're doing, or oh my gosh, you're so prominent, or I found your contact in my phone, but I don't really remember who this is. I just got one today that says, hey, are we still meeting for coffee? Some obscure number. They basically weasel their way into your life with flattery, kindness. And the next thing you know, you've lost a bunch of money or exposed your bank account to them to siphon out information. Think it's crazy? Pig butchering, it's a new name, but it is a real thing. And it's happening all the time right now. And what's worse is they are abusing people to do the work. We are the humans. We are the weakest link, and unfortunately, we are the problem for fraud and financial theft. Our security solution, or I should say our solution to this problem, not the security solution, really is education. We want to train. We want them users, the end users, to look for the bad email addresses. We want them to look for the bad grammar, the bad spelling, which we've seen a lot of through those types of emails, or an account that maybe you've never used before, but it's the same style that you have, or maybe it's the same but in a different domain, but it looks like one you don't remember creating. And now that you're getting an email trying to renew, for instance, your Norton 360, when the name has changed and they're trying to bill me $500 or whatever it may be. But this gets tricky, especially with the new AI technology. I can use AI today to write an email, create a voice, even a picture in any language, right? With perfect grammar. And if I'm good, I can make that reply address look nearly perfect. But the A or the C might be in Skrillex or another language that the domain is registered to, that I didn't realize that instead of it being a curly at symbol or an A with a tail, an at symbol with a tail on it, especially late at night when people aren't necessarily looking twice. These types of attacks can bypass what we've been taught. We have tons of unknown risks: clicking, opening, denial, vulnerabilities, water holes, and all sorts of different types of techniques that you might hear about out there in the news or hearing glancing that really any of us could fall for. And that is the human part. So again, we're the weakest link. Machines are what we talk to. And when we put them together, the entire big workflow I spoke about is where we've got some pretty big risks. So now we have to ask, how does your organization or our organization recognize identity security risks? What do you need to educate yourselves with, and possibly your organization or even your partners or clients, to say, yes, I potentially have an identity crisis. These are the risks I need to solve for. First, IGA, identity governance. Faults in the joiner, mover, leaver process can leave an organization highly vulnerable. Dormant accounts that have privileges are the worst. A system that may have been decommissioned, and end-of-life device that needed to be pulled out of the network, and its accounts are still present. And no one identified the association and removed them. What about the employee that left and there is still a straggler account? What about shadow IT that's out there that's at fault, or bring your own cloud that's at fault? Every organization needs to be able to track its identities and associated accounts. And remember, a single identity could have multiple accounts for human. For a machine, an identity could have multiple accounts, but maybe has an owner in the middle, a human who is responsible for the care, the feeding, provisioning, deprovisioning, or submitting a ticket for those provisioning, deprovisioning, and its potential sprawl, so that there are no faults out there. Now, for the largest of enterprises, this is potentially, could be, a Herculean ask if they have not gotten around to it by now. But I'll tell you, faults in the process are what is getting so many organizations and companies in trouble today. So many. This is a perfect example of the recent Microsoft breach where, again, that global admin being on a forward-facing website with an easy-to-get password subjected to a spray attack because no one knew it was allocated to a specific resource out there in the wild. Partially disabled accounts, dormant accounts, all of these fall into the same mix. You have to make sure for every organization, IGA is done correctly. Now, hand in hand with that, we have to think about privileged accounts. These are root, admin, anybody that has entitlements to create, destroy, access things that are important to the business, sensitive information that would be important to the business. Why? Because if the threat actor gets to this account, it could be the game over event for that business. Everything from a persistence presence to a golden ticket attack to ransomware directly being launched, you name it. A privileged account, even for a local admin on an end user's desktop, can be devastating to the business. So we need to make sure, one, end users don't have rights. Number two, every admin, root admin, power user, etc., is managed and vaulted in some sort of privileged access management solution. And that anything of privilege, actually every identity, uses MFA, multi-factor authentication. And we are talking strong MFA, FIDO2-based, token-based, passkey-based, not push notifications that, oh, we got a pop-up, yes, yes, deny, deny. And then we get subject to what we've all heard as the MFA fatigue. In addition, we have to consider disabling all of the privileged accounts that are out there that will never be used. They were used for the original configuration for a system, and they need to stay that way unless something major happens, because if they are flipped enabled, that should be a red flag, especially outside of change control. You also have to think about those unmanaged privileged accounts, something set up in dev or QA environment that has been given excessive privileges because someone was playing with something or piloting a new piece of software that was never removed. All of those can be used, and privileged accounts, again, being the most important, that could compromise someone in an organization. Now, number three, access from end of life or vulnerable assets. I love the screenshot on the right. Back in the 1990s, a company called eMachines offered this computer. You know, once again, I might be dating myself here, but, you know, with that big sticker, never obsolete. How more true could that be today? Browsers, operating systems, applications, all technology goes obsolete at some point. The problem is we don't keep track of it well. There are no security patches. We may not know what's in place. We may not know there's an embedded library, and on and on and on. with the biggest risk ultimately being the browser. Hi, my organization standardized on Chrome, but I forgot to remove all the Internet Explorers from my machine. Someone may run it, or someone may have an old ActiveX plugin that is needed for application X, Y, or Z that there really is no equivalent. And that's what I have to use. That obsolescence could be the end of you. In fact, the browser or that server or that workstation is targeted, an email is opened with an exploit. Anything is fair game. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in terms of how a browser or anything else could be compromised, but essentially end-of-life applications have to be treated with special care. They need to have their own perimeters, their own security controls. They should never talk to the internet, etc. Right? If your business still needs to keep these, they need to maintain them in the business and in the operation aspect of it. Never obsolete is never true. Everything goes obsolete. And if your business needs to have it, make sure it's fully contained. Number 4, unmanaged applications. We all know what BYOD is, right? Bring your own device. We bring our own phones. We bring our own tablets. Some organizations even bring your own laptops, which by today's standard is actually pretty wild. But you got to ask, how do they make sure it's a trusted device? It's safe, especially if you have mandates like zero trust. You also have that insider threat. It moved from 2 years ago to being the number 5 on the top attack vectors, now into 7. So it's still in the top 10. But ultimately, this is the hardest. This is when you have an employee, a contractor, or vendor who has something bad in their head or being paid for something they shouldn't and is stealing information or going to do something malicious that is really outside of the scope here, but it's still relevant, because if someone turns bad and ends up attacking your environment from within because they were already trusted, we have to find a way of identifying them and boxing them in and containing their work. Now, again, since COVID, we've had a slew of remote workers, and many of us still work remote today. I mean, I'm working remote. Everything from connecting to cloud applications, using VPN, VDI environments, etc. How do we make sure that that person is using all the applications on their trusted device or untrusted device for that matter, and they're appropriate? My favorite problem is BYOC. Bring your own cloud. This is the biggest proliferation of this problem, and that is ChatGPT as a prime example. If any of you have watched the news, we've been discussing various use cases. Think about what happened to Samsung at the end of last year. Some technicians basically, needed to configure an application, didn't know how to write the configuration file, put in, well, this is, the IP address, here's the host name and all the different parameters into ChatGPT, and it spit out a perfect configuration file for them to use. But that information became public because of the model, the open ChatGPT model, and was leveraged by threat actors to get into Samsung. Anybody can load applications for their own cloud. They can do it on their home computer. They can do it, working separately. They can then copy it over or email it over, or even message it over or chat it over. Bring your own cloud represents a very interesting risk, especially if you're using it for things like marketing tools, generative AI, and all other, and these types of concepts where it can expose information, and internet systems, or internal systems for that matter, make it easier for an identity attack vector to be leveraged. So we have to consider shadow IT and bring your own cloud usage. We know it's going to happen, but making sure employees do not put the sensitive information in it that can be used to compromise our systems. We have to make sure that any access to infrastructure, platform, SaaS services is within the established workflows, guidelines, operating principles that the organization accepts, because anything outside is a high risk, especially if the end user does something really stupid. And I say really stupid, like using the same password outside of the organization as they have inside of the organization. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but my gosh, that it's still happening, and it happens all the time. And then finally, the unmanaged accounts in production. Very similar to step one, the joiner, mover, leaser processes for all of these need to be rock solid. Now, number 5, little obtuse, but this is one you have to think about for a minute. How many places within an organization did someone put their personal email address or their personal phone number or their personal home address? And what are the risks of this? Well, you know what? All of those should only exist in the HR system. They shouldn't be any place else. Oh, but I'm at home. I'm a help desk technician. I got an alert late at night of an outage. I'm going to put in my personal phone number in there. I'm going to use my personal email address in there so that I have a backup for MFA. Bad idea. Because if your personal account is hijacked, that means the threat actor can use your MFA with your personal email address to get into the system. It's really not that hard. In fact, if anybody's personal email is compromised, I would attest and even defend the fact that it's game over for that person, because everything from banking password resets to other applications that they run personally can all be undone with a personal email. So personal email addresses should never exist. Old school wise, if I was to hack into your computer and knew your personal email address, the first thing I would do is go into an automatic forward and send everything you get to me. And so that way, when you do a password reset, I can set it to something I want, delete the email, delete it from the deleted box, right? Or sent box, and you don't even know any better. That's the old school way. But we should never have these in our corporate systems. The problem is we have a lot of them. People test out cloud services, cloud providers, and they will use their Gmail account. They will set it up that way, and then they'll go, you know what? I created this environment, all this work. I'm going to move it into production. And they forget it's actually still out there. It's not crazy. Believe it or not, it happens all the time. People should not be using their personal information for business systems, for production, for verification, for MFA, for anything. Now, through all of these slides, you've seen I've posted various articles on the right-hand side, and all of these examples and are a testament to these types of attacks. They're real, they're happening, and they are escalating, as we talked about in the beginning, and we must be very conscious of them. Now, the real thing is here, how do I solve for it? And we're going to find out really quickly that existing technologies from SIEM to EDR to identity governance alone doesn't work. From a security information and an event management, it's very difficult or near impossible to write rules for things you've never seen before. You're always looking for a particular pattern. You're looking for something that hasn't happened to an identity in a place that's not been seen before to ensure it doesn't happen again, or I get properly alerted. Sure, if the attack happens all the time, like picking up a virus or a firewall port or an open port, SIEM does great. But how does it handle identity threats when they're unknown? And typically what we see is SIEM doesn't. It fails. It can only do what it knows. Then we talk about endpoint detection and response. What works there? There are vendors out there with great identity solutions, built into the EDR solutions, but it only works where the agent is present. It doesn't work in the cloud. It doesn't work for infrastructure. It doesn't work for identity providers. And it certainly doesn't work for SaaS applications. So that's only a fraction of the risk surface to manage. And finally, identity governance. That's a snapshot in time. You're getting an attestation report or a certification report of what it looks like at that time from the joiner, mover, leaver process, right then and there. This is where everything is. That is amazing for inventory and mapping and asset control and incident response to know who owns it and where things are. But it doesn't do anything for the configuration, and it doesn't do anything for real-time monitoring. Identity-based attacks need to be monitored with identity security and cannot be done with these solutions alone. So we need a new way. What does that look like in the real world? And as I began this presentation, I told you, I held the role of deputy CTO and deputy CISO. Back in October, we had an incident, flat out, public knowledge. We've done podcasts on it, blogs on it, even webinars on it. But for Okta, it was a support breach, and we identified it. It was back in October, and more of, if you talk to our CISO, more of a Halloween nightmare than it was a trick-or-treat type session. We basically identified something with our own product and tooling where it said a session token hijacking occurred that no other tool in our environment uses. The news that came out on this was quite startling because there was not one on-premise indicator of compromise. From the end user's laptop to our SIM, nothing. There was nothing out there that told us this third-party solution, authorized, mind you, third-party solution that provides identity services for our company had been breached, but our own tooling did. This was identity theft in the worst way possible. The threat actor essentially got a hold of a browser where it was end of life or not. We still don't know, the attack vector there, but in its original configuration, it stored a secret to connect to two tools together, and that was stored in the end user's browser. They were able to compromise that and basically add an identity provider or IDP and look at all the support tickets that were being generated in Okta for a few weeks. Quite startling. One of our technicians, doing his normal day job, if you will, was having a problem with the feature, and we were asked to create a HAR file. If you're not familiar with the HAR file, it's an HTTP archive file that does a full screen recording, including the session token. Basically, the threat actor took that token because they had access to our support tickets and went straight to the API and started issuing commands. Pretty profound. Our tool, I'll talk about it here in a moment, basically said session token hijacking. Gave us the alert right out of the gate. How? Because there was no authentication. It was a new device. It had no MFA. It came from a foreign IP. We knew nothing about it in the SIM that could have been mapped to it. But commands were being ran with privilege, without authentication, without any authorization, because it was a stolen token. And they tried to run a variety of commands, give me a report, add a user, do this, do that. The entire dwell time in our environment was less than 4 hours, which, is amazing. Nothing happened, nothing leaked. We got it. However, for someone like Okta, they reported 184 clients. 3 of them publicly came forward. 181, we have no idea. The dwell time was over 2 weeks. As soon as we saw it in our product, indicate that session hijacking, we opened tickets and started engaging Okta, straightforward. But that incident for us didn't turn into a breach because we had proper identity security defenses in play. And when you look through the entire timeline of when the ticket was opened to the communications, to the logs, to Okta acknowledging it, it's still a pretty short period of time, very short period of time. But with proper tooling, you can find these types of threats and the appropriate usage of privileges, and accounts being created, and accounts that are new with privileges, all doing the things I talked about in those 5 steps that they shouldn't have been doing. So let's think about how this model works. In your organization on the top, everybody has identity and access management tooling for employees, contractors, vendors, customers, partners, et cetera. This is your house, your building, your space, maybe in the cloud, right? Now, horizontally, you have business requirements. The user experience must be rock solid. They cannot have or get pushback from the end user for tooling. If so, the solution just ultimately fails. The user experience has got to be good, non-intrusive, and acceptable. And it's important to have operational efficiency. If you introduce, let's say, a privileged access management tool, for example, that makes you log into a website, check out a password, go to your favorite application, paste it in, and do it for every single thing you do, it's not operationally efficient. It should streamline operations. So the password is obfuscated, right? Not exposed to the user and just works, right? Well, we'll get back to the identity security component here in a minute. Then you have your business stakeholders, everybody in the business that cares, from governance to regulation to oversight management. This can be everything from the CIO all the way down to the teams managing infrastructure and automation. Everybody involved with the maintenance, care, feeding, workflows, policies, and procedures for an entire IAM system. Now, no IAM system can operate alone. No vendor can operate alone. No vendor actually has all of the tooling today. Some have a lot, some have best in breed, but there is no one that does all of it today. And that's where you need good integration for data discovery, data loss prevention, connectors to the EDR, all sorts of automations. They have to coexist today. And then you actually have the IAM solutions themselves, which can do identity threat detection and response. But mainly it's for their own products. And I mean, an MFA solution is, good at reporting or alerting on things that are getting abused. An identity provider will tell you, hey, there's a rogue, there's rogue calls to an outside system that you saw, with the Okta support breach. Single sign-on will shield itself from someone trying to do something malicious. When you tie all 4 of the layers together between the business requirements all the way down, to the bottom with ITDR, you get an entire piece or a model referred to as the identity fabric. These are the people, processes, technologies, integrations, secrets, credentials that make the entire workflow happen. That's the identity fabric. Everything connected together, password links to complexity, to procedure, to how someone resets a password, how you do join or move or leaver processes, how you get entered into a SSO solution. That's your fabric. Now, the identity security of it all, which is a business requirement, looks at all of those places and tells you if there is a flaw or if it's being breached. Remember the diagram I had earlier where all of the workflows and identities connected end to end through everything? I indicated that any penetration point could be a risk to the business. The monitoring of that is identity security. And in today's age, it is an absolute requirement that we do so. The question is, how? We look at, I'm showing you the product we use internally. We run all of our own products here at Beyond Trust. This is called Identity Security Insights, and it helped us here at BT identify risks, identity security risks within our organization. This is the tool that helped identify the Okta support breach. It has detections, recommendations. It tells you, the runtime of an account using an AI engine that could be potentially malicious, doing something that it shouldn't, like a privileged account without MFA or a dormant account that's being, activated or touching a system it shouldn't. through the recommendations that cover misconfigurations, things that should not be out there, implementation flaws with IDP or identity providers, with SSO, with MFA, Entra ID, with Okta, with Ping, a wide variety of systems, over 30 connectors that could lead to any of those accounts in that entire workflow. Establishment of your business being a risk. So we are doing both. We are doing vulnerability management for identities by telling you where the flaws are. We are watching in real time, runtime of occurrences to see what's at fault, what's being used. Now, this is a cloud solution in AWS. The entire setup, 30 to 60 minutes, no live. Read-only API connectors and some of your on-prem technologies like AD or even our own password-safe solution or cloud for Okta, Entra ID, or really any place else. With those connectors in place, after about 2 hours, you start getting the results. You start finding all of your identity account relationships. You start finding the flaws in that joiner, mover, leaver process. You find your dormant and rogue accounts, and you find where the mismappings are. And that's the power of this brand new product we have on the market to do identity security, address the flaws we talked about with critical case studies like the Okta support breach. So from a Beyond Trust standpoint, look, over 1,500 employees. We're in 24 countries, founded in 2003, 75 patents that drive our technology to be the best in breed. We're a recognized leader in the privileged identity management and identity security space. We are a leader in intelligent identity and access security with a vision to protect all identities across the globe. Why? Simple fact. In order to do privilege access best, you have to go beyond privilege access and manage every identity, because any identity, even at the lowest form with privilege escalation, could be a liability to your business. So you have to look at everything, including privileged accounts. We fight every day to secure identities and empower organizations to protect their most precious assets, those identities and humans. If there's any question as to who we are or how good we are, you can look at the analyst, where they be here at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, Forrester PIM Wave, or even Cup Cole. We are recognized across the globe for being a leader in identity security and PAM. When we look at our product portfolio, I try to use this really as an education slide, right? If you start at the 12 o'clock, password safe, this is that old school traditional PAM that a lot of people think about when they hear PAM. This is the storage, vaulting, rotation, credential check-in, check-out, SSH key management, automation, and even session management across all privileged accounts. On the right, you have the privileged remote access. It's fundamental. All access these days are typically remote access, unless you're sitting in front of your own computer today, or even that server or the workstation, right? The work that we do in the cloud to go to a server to talk to something else in some form of remote access. You don't want RDP exposed. You don't want SSH exposed. You don't want to use vulnerable applications that could lead to a high risk. Do it in the most secure and modern way possible. Auto credential injecting, right? Monitoring the behavior of the users, contractor, vendor, third-party support, OT environments, all covered by privileged remote access. And then you have remote support. This is key. When a help desk technician or service technician needs to help you by controlling your screen, you don't want to give them admin rights. You don't want to have a backdoor account that they're going to use to elevate their work. This is where remote support comes in, where you can provide that remote help to somebody without an agent, without admin privilege. If we go all the way to the left, you'll see endpoint privilege management. This ideally is the removal of Unix, Linux, Windows, Mac admin, root, and local admin. No one operates on these boxes with admin credentials or privileges. Tasks based on policies, applications based on workflows, geolocation, and all sorts of material that fits into a zero trust model that allows just-in-time elevation, so that applications that need to run as an admin just work without giving admin rights. Doesn't matter the operating system. It's the best technology for removing admin rights, whether it's trying to meet cyber insurance requirements, stopping zero-day attacks or ransomware execution, or solving audit requirements for regulatory or compliance needs. If we go below that, below EPM, endpoint privilege management, we have directory bridging. Active Directory bridging is the joining of Unix and Linux to AD with groups, Entra ID, so that you can actually assign policies to those non-Windows-based systems when someone needs to log in, they can use their AD or their Entra ID credentials via Kerberos to authenticate. You don't need local admin accounts, and you don't need to manage multiple directories and stores. And last, but certainly not least, at the very bottom, which ties to the center, the nucleus of it all, the brain, is identity security insights. Less than a year old and represents a fundamental shift in the way we protect against the wild. And it is designed to monitor for what could be wrong with your access identity infrastructure. And that concludes, at this time, I want to thank you and thank the crew here, for allowing me to be able to speak to you today. And I'm happy. I think we have a few minutes here to field any questions before we wrap up. Again, hope you have a great day. Hope this was informative. And Francois, if we have any questions, let's see what we can answer.
Wonderful. Christopher, thank you very much. That was really insightful. Really appreciate it. I know we got some great feedback as you were going through the session. Let me ask you just a few questions. We have a few questions we can ask. When we're talking about the biggest factor influencing, a company's security posture, we're looking at audits, cyber insurance, compliance, current threat landscape, AI. Give us your thoughts on that. What is the biggest one when we're looking at those things?
You know what? It's interesting. We have so many different frameworks out there, so many people following MITRE ATT&CK, CIS, NIST. At the foundation, I truly believe they all have a common foundation or underlining. When we start to see some of the variances, and believe it or not, we're seeing it in cyber insurance requirements now. Cyber insurance is now writing requirements to give to an organization and base them as to whether or not they qualify for a cyber insurance policy, which is something I don't want to say we've never seen before. It's been going on for about a year, but cyber insurance is actually dictating the market. And now you have the NIST and the 800-207 and the executive order and all the new stuff coming up with the NIST CFS 2.0. Everybody's looking in different spots. I don't want to say that any one spot is better than another. If you're looking at one of those frameworks or you're looking at those controls, that's a great start. My recommendation would be don't pigeonhole yourself to just one set. I know that sounds like a huge undertaking, but make sure you're finding where maybe some of those gaps are, in how your security strategy is, and make sure you're spreading that evenly across the board and not just focusing on one. Because what we're finding out is one might leave you vulnerable to certain companies and certain industries in certain areas when it comes to security posture. Make sure you're doing that due diligence aspect and looking across multiple variances to find maybe where, and look, at the end of the day, the CISOs know where their weaknesses are. And truly it is a matter of how do we wrap our arms around that and manage that and put the right controls and policies and procedures in place, or even tooling for that matter, to make sure that those risks don't become an attack vector for the bad actors.
Wonderful. And since 95% of issues are usually related to human factors, let's talk cybersecurity awareness a bit. What are the best approaches to make sure your staff and your teams are well educated around the threats?
That is a great question, and it's interesting. That stat, if I'm not mistaken, because I remember reading it, it came up from a cyber insurance litigation attorney during a conference once. So it's funny that this question comes up. But the Symantec Internet Threat Report, if I'm not mistaken, basically stated that 95% of these breaches and compromise are due to human error. And if that is not a wake-up call for organizations to get the word out there to their users. And it doesn't matter whether they're the most seasoned IT professional, security professional, or somebody in HR, right? To get the word out there about what is happening in the modern threat landscape. One of the things, I didn't do it in this presentation, but one of the things that I try to bring awareness around at the beginning of presentations is what's going on in the world. And while we all know, and we've all heard about some of the MGM breaches and Colonial Pipeline and Solar Winds, right? What about the breaches we don't hear about? How are the bad actors getting in? What are they doing? What are the tactics? And to bring some exposure around that, to know that it is happening and occurring at such an alarming rate. Last year, the statistic was Mexico was actually hit the hardest, suffering 1,600 attacks per second. And users need to understand that they are the target. You are the target. And if we don't empower our users and educate our users with the awareness of what's going on, what to look for, what to not fall victim to, right? What's going on? What are some of the best practices, not only for them in a corporate world, but as you've seen through the presentation, even in the private personal world, not sharing or not using that same password, right? Those are the things that you can do to help start chipping away at some of those threat actors that are leveraging the users to do their dirty work or capitalizing on the users as those attack vectors into the organization. I've thought we're the problem. Humans are the problem. We are the weakest link, and we are the first line of defense when it comes to protecting our organization. Tooling and solutions only go so far, but the user themselves have to be made aware of the modern attack surface, how they're doing it and how they're being leveraged and capitalized on. So that really is, a huge thing to understand for CISOs and other organizations. Get the word out there, make users aware, train them, whether it's KnowBe4 or some other great tooling out there that you can use for security awareness. But education, it's huge, and it's big.
Wonderful. Well, Christopher, I think that's about it. I think we're wrapping up with time.
Awesome.
I want to thank you and Beyond Trust so much for this session, and want to inform people that our next session on the 25th is Privacy and Cybersecurity, Navigating Canada's Evolving Legal Landscape. And we've got a great group that's coming in. So I'm hoping that a lot of people will show up. I think it's already super packed. So we're looking forward to that. And I wish you the best day, Christopher, and a quick recovery from your trip.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And you too.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much.